As Michael had said, this is the second installment of our 3 technique talks covering the 3 days of the Curcio weekend. Last month we covered day 1, which is Friday. Today we're covering day 2, which is Saturday. And then in August we will cover day 3 on Sunday. So just again, the goal of this technique talk today is to gain a better understanding of the weekend differences by comparing the schedule and the 2019 Rector's Guide to the 2007 Curcio manual. Look at that. Okay, our agenda, same as last month. We'll cover some of the background, the purpose, the essence. We'll talk briefly about the challenges or weaknesses of the Curcios, a little bit about the history of the manual, and then our setup for the 3-day comparison. We'll go through meditations, the Royos, and then conclude with the Saturday schedule. Oh gosh, this is working so well. Okay, again, just to review the purpose of Curcio, and I'm just going to read it. You can read along with me or just listen. The immediate purpose: to provide a foundation so we may live what is fundamental for being Christian: love of God and love of neighbor, experienced through 3 essential encounters: the encounter with oneself, the encounter with Christ, and the encounter with others. The ultimate purpose of Curcio is to vertebrate Christianity in society with those who live what is fundamental for being Christian: the love of neighbor, and to live their daily lives while strengthening the 3 encounters. Both of these coming from the Leaders Manual that most of us are all familiar with. So, okay. Any questions about that? I think we're good? Okay. The essence of Curcio. We've got this broken down into 2 pieces. The essence includes the Curcio method. That is the process that gives rise to the baptized knowledge and conviction to live and share what is fundamental to being a Christian. And then the essence of the Curcio movement, again, to vertebrate Christianity in our society. And then there's a little blurb there. Again, all this coming from the Leaders Manual. I'll just point out, and that's that little beneath the Curcio movement, living what is fundamental in authentic, continuous, and a progressive way. I think that is key to the essence of Curcio, emphasizing that this is not just a one-time occurrence. It is something that is lived each day. And for us as Curciistas, lived in our 4th day. Oops, sorry, gotta go back. Okay, challenges to or weaknesses of Curcio. And I want to point out that this isn't our title. This comes directly from Eduardo Bonin. And I would like to share the quote. I know Michael read it last month, and it's always good to read it, as it's a good reminder to get us into the mentality, the mindset of our founder, Eduardo Bonin. If we compare the Curcio movement to a tree, we are happy to see that it has grown, because the evangelical seed sown in many hearts and cultivated with prayer has given its fruit. But it also hurts us to see that in some places, no doubt with the best intentions, they have taken the tree of the Curcios for the Christmas tree and have been hanging lights and decorations, that is, their favorite brilliant ideas, and have gradually been spoiling its clear and simple profile. Again, this is a quote directly from Eduardo Bonin in his writing, called The Spiritual Testament. And actually, it references 2009 there. He actually wrote it in 1998. Eduardo passed away in 2008. So I think that this is just when it had went to print. But it's interesting to look at that timeline from the first Curcio to where we are today. The ornaments that Eduardo refers to are not just our ornaments, but they were ornaments hanging on trees all over the world. Eduardo identified them again as being well-intentioned, but also identified it as due to the lack of understanding of the cares and the intention of the founder. So just kind of lay that as some framework for the next slide. But any questions about these weaknesses? Okay. So we talked about some of the CICC ornaments last month, and I'm not going to kind of go through them, but I'm just going to go ahead and decorate the tree by sliding through here. Sorry, this just takes a moment. Okay. Again, those ornaments were hung all over the world. So that's our segue into a brief history of the 2019 Rector's Guide. So I'm just going to kind of go through a few highlights of the history. As Michael mentioned last month, there was an invitation by Pope St. John Paul II in 1998 to all ecclesial movements and communities to return to their roots, to know their founder, their charism, their history, and discern the mentality of their founder. Prior to this, however, back in Majorca, Eduardo Bonin found on his travels around the world that the charism was being lost to adaptations, additions, deletions. He actually referred to these in his writings as oddities. Those are those ornaments that we had shown in that graph. And he, again, identified that this was due to a lack of understanding of the mentality and method that flows from the charism. So he set out to meet with those across the world and kind of get the message out, familiarize everyone with what that charism was. This led to conversations with leaders across the globe who were genuinely interested in understanding and therefore living the authentic Curcio. And that authentic Curcio is what is referred to as that foundational charism. I think that's a word that's kind of risen to the surface lately in all these studies and some of the changes that have been referenced over the years. But that is the foundational charism, the authentic living of the Curcio. So meanwhile, back in the United States, after this, in response to the Pope's invitation, the U.S. national staff traveled to Majorca to attend these conversations and gatherings, and there discovered the richness of this foundational charism. And they were also able to gain access to a lot of Eduardo's writings with better translations. So this is where some of those, the changes in that 2007 manual came about for those who were around at that time. And I think everybody here was around at that time. There were changes to names of the royals, all reflecting the original names of the royals from that authentic Curcio. That also led to changes in the Pilgrim's Guide that we saw in 2016. Again, it was a simplified version of the Pilgrim's Guide. A lot of the prayers were removed and replaced with the simple prayers that were used on the original Curcio. It was also during this time that it was kind of discovered, if you will. Eduardo had his own tripod, which he called Christ, Person, and Friendship. And it's from this that I think we were able to really discover the foundational piece of the theology and the psychology of Curcio. Theology being the study of God, psychology meaning the study of person. So that's where we get the Christ and person piece. And then the friendship piece was the means through which the theology and the psychology were delivered on the weekend. So it all kind of came together and made sense that way. The Spiritual Testament, that little book that's right there on the screen. Neat story about this. As Eduardo approached his 90th year, which would be his last year, he began to compile his thinking and his work into one document, which he called his Spiritual Testament. The last part of this Spiritual Testament was to have been a detailed step-by-step document of what the Curcio in Christianity is and what it consists of. So that's where the name Step by Step came from. Now, Eduardo died before he actually had that fully compiled. So that work was completed by the Majorca leadership and in collaboration with the U.S. Curcio to what we now know as the Rector's Guide. So that picture there is a new picture because it's actually in print now of the Rector's Guide. So when we see Rector's Guide, it refers to Rector and Rectora, obviously. So that was kind of a lot. Any questions about what I just shared with you? None? Okay. All right, moving on. So this was the same slide that Michael used last month, the new Rector Guide background here in Central Indiana. It was handed over to us and all diocesan leadership in the spring of 2019 through all the regional encounters. For us, it was April of 2019. It actually was an encounter that we hosted up in Tipton. And then June 11th is when it was presented to the Secretariat. And at that point, we kind of began, looking at this new Rector Guide, which we actually had in a PDF form. It wasn't in the bound form that we now have. So we worked through that and put it together to implement here in Central Indiana. The first weekend being March of 2020. That's as far as we got, obviously, with the break in everybody's lives. But since then, we've had 8 weekends with that were implemented with this new Rector Guide. We have presented this to team formations. And I'd also like to note that after each weekend, we have gathered feedback on this new Rector Guide. And I'd like to qualify that. We get the feedback with regards to implementation, not the content. The content has not changed. So any questions about that, how it's been rolled out here in Central Indiana? Good? All right, so let's look at the second day. Okay, we'll start with the meditations. Again, this is the same slide as last month. No changes between the meditations that are offered by the spiritual advisor. Flow of the Royals. Really no change there. You can see between the two a little bit of name changes. And I guess I'll just kind of point out here that it's critical to know that that part has not changed. The spiritual royals cover the theology of living a life in grace. That includes, habitual grace, actual grace, sacraments, obstacles to grace, and life in grace. So all the focus is on the theology of grace, how God is, how God gives us his grace. The lay royals, obviously, is the witness to the actual living of a life in grace given by lay people, kind of how we are in living that life. Each of these supporting the encounters with self, Christ, and others on each respective days. Now, we did note that there is a few title changes. The layperson in the church is now called the layperson, a Christian in the world. Obstacles to a life of grace. Again, minor changes, obstacles to grace, study environments to study the environment. I really don't know the rationale for the last two, but I will say just a comment about the layperson, a Christian in the world, because that's a fairly significant change in that the emphasis is now shift to our role as a layperson, not just within the church, but being church in the world. So are there any questions about that? There were some last month, but I know a lot of the same people are here. Good with that? Okay. Okay, on to Saturday morning. Again, our side-by-side, 2007 Curcio Manual, 2019 Rector's Guide. Really not much has changed. You can see the meditations are all still there. You'll see on Saturday morning in the 2007 Curcio Manual, we had the devotion to the Blessed Virgin on Saturday morning. Sometimes weekends did it, sometimes we didn't. That is really not part of the weekend anymore. That was also in the Pilgrim's Guide. It's not in the Pilgrim's Guide anymore. So that came out. You'll also notice that Mass is now first thing in the morning, and that is a result of the change in the Sacraments Royal. You'll see in the 2007 column that there was Sacraments Part 1 and Sacraments Part 2. Part 2 being the Eucharist portion of the Sacraments Royal was given as the homily during Mass. That is no longer taking place. The Sacraments Royal includes all the sacraments and how each is a source of grace in our lives. And it's not to diminish the importance of the Eucharist, but just to keep it all in one place. The other piece in reference to Mass that they felt was important, that in the original Curcio, it wasn't done that way. But also the emphasis is that what one experiences on the Curcio weekend, meaning the new Curcista, is no different than what he or she might experience at home. So replicate is what is normal in one's life on the weekend, not to elevate things, extended homilies, anything like that. So Mass on Saturday will be Mass, the same Mass that one might experience at home, just the daily Mass. So that's kind of is an overview of those. You will note under 2019 Rector's Guide in italics, it says Introduction of General Palanca and Chapel Visits. That's nothing new. I just have that. That's my notation because General Palanca is introduced on Saturday and not on Friday afternoon after the actual grace. And I will be talking a little bit more about that. So before I do, any questions about Saturday morning, particularly Mass or the Sacraments Royal?
Jennifer, are the masses still, would you consider low Mass with no music?
Correct. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Again, what we would experience at home going to Mass on a Saturday morning. So
well,
thank you.
It depends on which church you go to.
That's true. That's true. And I think, and I don't want to say there really aren't exceptions. Obviously, there was that one weekend where that Saturday was the Feast of St. Joseph. So we were allowed to have music and, the readings appropriate for that feast day. So that would be the only exception really for a Mass on a Friday or a Mass on a Saturday during a Curcio weekend. But yeah, thank you for making that distinction. Anybody else? Okay. As I said, I do want to say a few things about Palanca because I think it's been generally accepted by on the weekend by the team, and it really hasn't been that much of a change or a distraction that, that something is missing. But I think for the fourth day community, that's a piece that we still kind of struggle with because the Palanca was a big part of what we were able to contribute. We, meaning the fourth day community, to the 3-day weekend. So I'm going to go to the next slide. Definition of Palanca, or in the Leaders Manual. With Curcios, meaning the 3-day Curcios, the emphasis should be on Palanca in general, offered by the fourth day community for the community being formed during the 3 days. What matters is not that someone prays or sacrifices for X person, but that it is done and offered for everyone in the Curcio. At the bottom of that page is page 117 in the Leader's Manual. It says the offering of personal Palanca, that being cards, notes, etc., should be limited, since most of the time it can be more of a burden than an aid for the team. So, this is something that's always been there. It's always been recommended. And I think this is one of the, I guess you could consider it an ornament that we had added to the weekend. When I say we, it was happening all over. Because the next slide, and I know this is rather lengthy, this was a statement that was given to all diocesan leaders from the National Curcio Center, obviously drafted in 2018, with regards to Palanca, because it raised so many questions across the country about, okay, what about Palanca? That was we thought that was such a big part of it, that personal Palanca. And I don't know where it comes from. I'm sure it comes from a writing. I couldn't find it. Eduardo Bonin was a prolific writer. But because it was given by the National Curcio Center, it comes from somewhere. So I'm just going to read this because I think this is important. General Palanca and prayers that are being offered for the success of the 3-day Curcio are communicated by those from the outside by means of individual prayer stimulated at group reunions or altreas. Prayers are also received from within the Curcio movement, such as from dioceses and regions offering holy hours, acts of piety, masses, rosaries, etc. That's what we have always known as general palanca. You know, those pieces of paper that are up on the wall. What's interesting is that first sentence about the individual prayer stimulated at group reunions or ultreas. And I'm going to come back to that. So moving on, in some dioceses, personalized communications to new cursees are sent through palanca letters, greeting cards, etc. In some cases, the sender is giving advice to them on what to do or which attitude to take. It is not advisable to make these communications since they could put undue pressure on them. Personal letters should not be encouraged. So there's a difference between individual prayer and personalized palanca, and that's the distinction that I want to make here. And I think where there's been a lot of confusion. And probably the best, maybe the best example, I mean, I know that we've always written letters to those that we know in our parishes with notes. That undue pressure that's mentioned above refers to creating emotions or feelings that causes a new cursee to move from uncertainty of what he or she is hearing or living in the curcio at that moment to surrendering to the message. However, they are not surrendering out of free will, but because of what was written in the personal letter, greeting card, etc., and the emotions they experience while reading it. This can be viewed as manipulation or coercion. So an example might be like a letter that, well, I'll give you an example, a personal letter example. When I had made my curcio, Paul wrote in mine, "I bet you are crying like a baby right now." You know, and I wasn't. So I'm thinking, how should I be feeling right now? If Paul thinks I should be crying like a baby, should I be crying like a baby? Am I missing something? So that's kind of that coercion, that kind of interruption of the freedom of the person on the weekend. It's not to be again, very well intentioned, but it's our expression as an individual in the fourth day of where we think they should be on the weekend. Does that make sense? So yeah, question. Any questions about that?
I think a lot of people might not know what palanca is in general because maybe they've come off a Grace Renews weekend, you know, and they think what we've been saying is appropriate, but they don't know that it's not appropriate, that it could be coercion, and you know, how do you feel?
Yeah.
It's just a general thought, you know, and I don't know how we publish that out to them and say this is what personal palanca really should, well,
Yeah.
be. And then the other part, talking about personal palanca should not be encouraged. It's interesting how the parish representatives have asked some questions about, in the past, they would have a place similar to like the Grace Renews people that say, this is where you put your palanca. Okay. And if all of a sudden you set that off, then you have the people that want to give it. Now, as a parish representative, we've now told them the importance of personal palanca isn't the same as it was, and we encourage general palanca wherever possible. And we also tell them that the personal palanca, if you still decide to give it, will be given in their fourth day envelope. Okay. But by stopping them from having a place for it to be put, you know, is that something that should be encouraged and say, sorry, we're not accepting personal palanca? And I think the CIC community has said, no, we're not going to totally stop it. We're going to kind of explain what's changed, and still they're allowed to collect it. Is that true? Is that what people are doing? Or should we totally not collect it anymore at parishes?
Well, the last line here, Tom, just to answer that quickly, the dioceses that continue to allow personal palanca should be told to collect the palanca and place it in a bag and give to the cursees at the end of
okay.
a closing.
I was ahead of myself.
And that's what we have been doing. And there's nowhere that says that one cannot write a personalized letter.
Right,
I mean, that's not, Curcio is not about dictating how you pray, but with regards to palanca, you know, it's individual. So, you know, when this all changed, I was one of those persons who wrote a letter to everyone, whether I knew them or not. Because it occurred to me that, I'm not just going to pray for one person on the weekend. We are praying for the weekend.
Right.
The personalized letter to the people we know, there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not necessarily Palanca. If you're you're not just offering the sacrifice for one person on the weekend, correct? I mean, when we
Right.
pray, we pray for the entire weekend. So
Right.
that's really the distinction, and kind of eliminating that the individual or that personalized Palanca gives way for the general Palanca to really be effective. And I think for those who have lived one of these weekends as a team member and as a new Cursista, have experienced the power of the general Palanca. I mean, it really is serving the purpose of being that lever. So it's powerful.
And I think you're right. As this paragraph states, I think people have started to either doing the general Palanca, which we say is available on the website, and still have, knowingly, they might have stopped giving, like you said, to every single person and everybody on the team, and having the team members not have to write at 12 midnight Palanca for people that don't have Palanca because they just don't. But I think by still allowing it in a manner and saying how important that the general is, I think it's getting more and more received, don't you?
I think so. I don't know for sure, but I mean, I think my experience having, been on teams and getting feedback is that yes, that is the case. And I think that, if one wants to write, and it's again, I like where it says in the first paragraph, from the outside by means of individual prayer, stimulated at group reunion. So, and at a group reunion and in Altrea, we are praying as a group in a community. But I can still write an individual expression of my prayer. When I do for weekends, just for example, I will do a letter like, to the men of Curcio 125. And then I'll write my, what my prayer and sacrifice is, and that goes up on the wall. And that's one way that one can offer this individually, but not have it personalized. So I think it's personalized is the key word here. That is between you and your friend, and or your community, and that's why it's given at the end. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right. And I think the 72-hour prayer chain also blows people's minds when they know that people from around the community are, praying for them and have been praying for them for many, many weeks. So when I see all that.
And that is a beautiful expression of prayer for the 3-day weekend. So.
And just another example of the coercion that's missing is when you walk into your room and you see letters on your bed and you see letters on everybody else's bed. That whole mindset of, that person got a lot of letters, I didn't get as many letters. Or even when you find out that, hey, you're getting more letters over the weekend, then you stop anticipating, you start anticipating, well, I haven't received my letter from Kelly or from somebody. I wonder if they wrote a letter. It's just a little thing that I think has, for me personally, has a significant impact. And by just eliminating that step altogether, Tom, I'm just thinking of this out loud, by handing those personal Palanca to the individuals at the end, they're not going to know any difference.
Right. I agree.
It's completely, and so they're still getting the personal Palanca as they would have originally, and the timing is just better, I think, because it doesn't put that undue pressure. I like that phrase. And Jennifer, in my attempt to unmute myself, I ended up inadvertently taking control back, but you still have control.
That's okay.
You just need to click and go.
Oh, okay.
Could I offer?
Yeah, go ahead, Ward. Yes.
Well, we've been talking about the effects of Palanca on the weekend itself with the team and with the candidates, but at the same time, one of the things that I have long seen is that individual Palanca at the parish level is at some point it is the only connection. It is the strongest connection that the parish itself has with the ongoing weekend. if we discourage writing personal Polanka, that I'm just concerned that that connection might be lost.
And I'm so glad you said that. And I was going to bring that up, Ward, because I have heard that feedback as well. People who are like, I'm told we can't do this anymore. I'm like, no, that's not the case. I think, we need to, that's where this distinction, yes, we individually pray. And I do agree with you that for many of us, especially if, that is your connection to the weekend and to those new cursees when they come back to your parish. That was always the thing. Like in our parish, here's all the people who are making a weekend from St. Simon. Make sure you write all your Polanka so they know that they are supported by their community. And I think that is very important. I mean, they're a local community, not the, the General Polanka is the larger Cursillo community. But there is, as you said, that local community in our parishes where those group reunions are formed and where Altreas are formed. And we don't want to lose that connection. I totally agree with you. So the encouragement should be, go ahead and write the personal Polanka, but just know that it's going to be given to them at the end of the weekend. I think it's so important to make that connection, especially as a fourth day person in the fourth day. I love knowing when people at St. Simon are making a weekend, because then I'm prepared, I can write a personal note, but more importantly, having written that note, I can reach out to them after their weekend. I can go to the closing and personally introduce myself to them and, welcome them not only to the larger community, but to our parish community where we have, a presence. So does that make sense? I mean, would that kind of clarification help? And maybe that's something that we need to state to clarify so that the fourth day community does know. We kind of know that interiorly as a team how it works, but not so much in the fourth day. So
I agree with what Ward said, that connection, it goes back to that personal connection in that first statement, under the encounter with each other, under the purpose of the movement. If people aren't writing those personal, when they write those personal letters, which should be Polanka based, they then too have that connection with that person, and maybe not knowing that that person was a Cursilloista in their parish, because most people who make a Cursillo don't know who other people are that have made a Cursillo. So unless the parish coordinator somehow gives out a list to the new person of these are Cursilloistas in the parish, a person would never even know who's made Cursillo. And I think there are a lot of people that make a weekend that someone sponsored, but have no idea that they're, I've heard people in the parish and say, I don't know who made Cursillo in my parish. And there's no way of knowing that unless the parish coordinator's involved, which is another whole story and topic. But I think that we need to continue to somehow get people to write personal Polanka so that they know that that support is out there, because how otherwise, if they don't write a general, how are they going to know that? Or the parishes used to do posters and send in, and have a lot of their people, put all their names on it. We're doing these masses and so many rosaries or prayer time or acts of kindnesses. Right. But, that doesn't even happen anymore. So somehow or another, that personal connection needs to get back incorporated, because we have the weekends to get people into the group reunions. And if they're out there and like, well, where are these Cursillo people? I can't even get in a group. So right. That's connected to down the road.
Amen.
Yeah. Agreed.
Back in the day, we used to count the Polanka that we were putting on each bed, because we didn't want somebody to feel bad. I remember the Chas did that all the time. And then at the team meetings, we put out a list for the team members to write Polanka to certain people that didn't get a lot. I can tell you a story of, I didn't get a lot of Polanka one weekend, and the Chas over the years had saved up all the Polanka that they couldn't hand out because the people never made the weekend, and there was a big bucket of those, and they
my
put them all on my bed.
Oh, golly.
So I
That's
had
funny.
Polanco
I remember that.
Cemetery.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, I know this is a lot of words up here, and I think, we are talking about words, but I think when we talk about personal Polanka, I think maybe the distinction is personalized Polanka that is not given on the weekend, meaning that I'm not writing a letter to Susie Jones because I know Susie Jones. I can write an individual, a personal Polanka that is addressed to the general weekend. So whether it's, I think the distinction is what is introduced on Saturday is not the personalized, but the general. Because if we remember, taking a step back from all of this, the 3-day weekend exists for the purpose of the 4th day. Polanka is an expression of those prayers and sacrifices offered by the 4th day community collectively. Now, we are individuals in that 4th day community, and I do agree. We have to make, it's important to make those personal connections. But as you said, Burley, those are connections. That's probably more of a 4th day piece. So I think we're kind of, I don't want to say we're splitting hairs. We're making some distinctions as where is the appropriate place for that kind of personalized contact. Again, I think as a 4th dayer, I like to be able to write Polanka because I agree. For me, it does. It connects me to the weekend. If I know that I am personally praying for things, I kind of follow along. Okay, it's Friday morning. I wake up. They're still in silent, blah, blah, blah. I can kind of commune with them on the weekend. And then for those in my parish, I can make that personal connection either at the end of the weekend or after the weekend, either through a letter or a face-to-face. So, and again, Burley, I know you said it kind of then shifts to the parish and the 4th day activity. So does that make sense? I mean, is it clear as mud right now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Jennifer, when you follow along like that, then by the end of the weekend, you're excited to go to the closing so you can see if your prayers were answered.
Yes.
And Burley, I know that as a parish representative, I've shared some newsletters that I sent out at the beginning a couple times prior to the weekend. And and I actually tell people who is going to be on the weekend, both team and candidates. And they've been happy to know that because, yes, they can go to the website. A lot of people don't do that to find out who's on the team. And so by doing that, I know our deacons and stuff who do personal Polanka, that gives them an opportunity to say, okay, thanks for sharing that because they didn't know who was going to be on the weekend because for whatever reason they didn't go to the website. But I was going to mention one thing doing general Polanka, and I just wanted to get your thoughts. Our Polanka chairman has provided on the website, and you probably have seen this, of the weekends that are taking place once a month or whenever. And it tells us, please play for those. And it would be personal prayer. But I was wondering if there was a way when we send that out, and just a thought, maybe this is too much, but some people said, well, how do I do personal Polanka for that particular city? And if there happens to be a website, just like our website, that has a link, I was wondering if we could share that link to say, here's Dallas. And by the way, if you want to do personal Polanka, here's their link. Here's here's New York, And if that person wanted to do personal Polanka for that particular city, they'd be able to do that. Or do we just let them go to their respective websites and make that statement if you want to do general Polanka? I, don't know if that's going too far, but I know in general, we just want people to pray personally for those teams that are having it. But if they wanted to do general Polanka, just like people have done general Polanka for us, I'm sure those other teams would like to see that. And I think our Polanka chairman does do that on behalf of the CICC to those respective weekends that are happening around the country. So I didn't know if that was something that if the community wanted to send a general Polanka, I'm trying to remember, are we seeing individual Polanka from people other than from the
than the
Secretariat.
actual like secretariats.
Right,
Not
right,
to my
yeah.
knowledge. And I think that's why I think it's wonderful that Patty puts it on our prayer chain. I mean, we are asked
Right.
to pray. So as we
Right.
pray,
Right,
we will include those weekends. So that's our individual prayer
right.
for those weekends outside of CICC.
Well, the other thing that people could do is sign up for the prayer chain that we show at the weekends. You know, sometimes there's only one name on an hour where there could be more. I mean, I don't know if, you know, sometimes it's hard to get people to even fill up that 72-hour prayer train if we still do that. And I don't know how to address that other than, you know, if there's a time at a closing that the comments could be made, like what we're just talking about, that, you know, to get more people to understand that about the general Palanca, because I think a lot of people don't understand about this new format and how to do it. And I know I've been approached by someone, how come they don't do the personal Palanca anymore? And I said, well, they do it. They just don't give it out till the end. You know, so it's not a distraction. You know, they put up the letters of general, but you're praying for the whole weekend and not just one person. And they're like, oh, well, I still like the old way. And I said, well, change is hard, but you know, we're praying for the whole weekend, not just for one individual person.
Verlee, like, just clarify that. So by handing it out at the end, that's the big roadblock for the person?
Well, they say, well, then why do it? I can just write them a letter or something, you know, or something, but they just like, well, it's kind of sad that they don't give it out during. And I go, why do you, I mean, it's important to you that they know that you're praying for them. I mean, if they find that out at the end, what difference does it make? You're still, you know, you still prayed for them. So, you know, to find that out at the end is can be just as important as finding it out during. But you're right, during the weekend, there's a lot of emotion, and like Jennifer said, you know, then what the expectation is, like, am I supposed to be getting more out of this, or am I not getting it? Or, you know, it does add more pressure to some people and in different ways. But, you know, you're trying to explain to people why we're giving it out at the end, and they're like, you know, they just don't want to change, I think, because that's the way it was. But I see less and less people, even in my parish, writing Palanca letters just because they go, well, they're not going to give them out to them anyway. And I go, yes, they do, but they get them out at the end.
Yeah.
And, but.
And I think you make a good point there, really, because I've seen that in our parish too. That was kind of a big windup, if you will, for all of the fourth day community to gather all the letters, and there was energy in that, and there was excitement in that, and it's just not emphasized now. So I think what I'm hearing, and it probably is a conversation that can be taken somewhere else as part of the, you know, is just, you know, that's kind of invigorating that fourth day community to support the 3-day weekend through prayer and sacrifice. And that's probably something that can be done, because, you know, the intention was not to strip that from the fourth day community. And I think we're finding out, as you say, that people are like, well, yeah, if they're not going to give it during the weekend, then I'm just not going to write it. Well, it's not about writing it. We still we still need the prayers and the sacrifices. So what I'm hearing is that, you know, we need to perhaps reframe this or explain it, clarify, you know, why we're doing it this way, and not so much focusing on the why, but just encourage, you know, that the prayer and sacrifices continue to be offered. So yeah.
Right. But I think that at closings is when we get our biggest majority sometimes of people to be able to explain that. And I don't think people just automatically go to the website to find out why we're doing what we're doing. I think sometimes you have to in person just give people a little bit of information about it, you know, so that, you know, they kind of know what's going on. And I kind of know they do this in the Evansville diocese, where they have their people come together before weekend closings, and they explain, this is why we're doing what we're doing before the candidates and the team all arrive. to give information. I mean, a lot of people don't understand it. So they're
Okay,
either not going to go
yeah.
to the website to read about it, or they're not going to read the newsletter, or they, you know, people have to hear it, and sometimes more than once.
Okay,
to
so what you're,
understand.
what
That's in
you're
another whole,
what you're suggesting then is that we would do this at closing. When we
just
have an
a little
audience.
tidbit about it, or
Yeah, we have
about
an
some
audience.
change.
It
Because you
can be
got your
mentioned
biggest
at
audience
Altrea's.
where they don't understand
Yeah,
it.
and we can do it at Altrea's as well,
Right.
where you have large.
Right.
Okay, so I hear
And
what
I
you're
know
saying.
Louisa has done that at some point, yes.
Okay, I mean, that's a great suggestion. All right. Okay, lots of good conversation on that, and I think that's probably a conversation that we'll need to continue. But thank you for all that you have contributed. Anything else on this specifically? Okay. Let me get to the next slide.
You did it.
All right. What's happening?
Well, you have control. Click
I
your
do?
down arrow or the one of the arrows, and you should be good. There you are.
Oh, there we go. Okay. This slide, and this kind of sums up a lot of what we just talked about. I didn't realize it would do that, but this section right here was also in that statement provided by the National Secretariat, but I really like it. Prayer in Palanca. The proof of our personal and collective relationship with God is prayer. Prayer during the 3-day Cursillo is basic. It is pilgrims praying with pilgrims. I love that. Let us remember that Cursillo is preferentially, but not exclusively, for the faraway person. This is the reason for having a pilgrim's guide that is basic. Every person living will have an opportunity to build on his or her prayer life in their 4th day. And I like this because it speaks directly to that charism of Cursillo that was given to Eduardo, you know, about it was created for those who are far away. Not people who are not necessarily not going to church, but are far away in that relationship with God, that don't know the love of God. But this also points to the rationale or the criteria of keeping the 3-day weekend simple. The things that are basic, but to finish off that conversation about pilgrims praying with pilgrims, I think that is the gist of General Palanca. That we're all in this together. We don't single anybody out. And in the spirit of that foundational charism, that the Cursillo is for everyone. It is for everyone. And for us to single out any one person, it doesn't necessarily hurt, but it distracts kind of from that message. And then again, about, the simplicity of the weekend, how important that is. So any comments or questions on that? I really like that quote. And again, I don't know where it comes from. Probably Eduardo, but I don't know for sure. Okay, so moving on to the 2nd day, Saturday afternoon. You'll see the 2019 Rector's Guide looks pretty sparse. And we've got a lot more factored in on the 2007 manual. And probably what's most obvious is that we used to schedule free time throughout the weekend, and it is not scheduled in the new Rector Guide. And the reason for that being, and that kind of goes to Eduardo's thinking, the importance of the person, the freedom of the person, that he or she is able to encounter, self, Christ, and others in a natural way. No distractions, not being coerced, not being told what to do, how they should feel, etc. So that time is used. So that big chunk of time, like between from 2 to 3:30, there's the action royal, and then we have obstacles to grace. So during that time, that's obviously when you have your table discussions, you're doing the poster work. Michael had referenced that, the poster work is now being done throughout the day, really at the discretion of those at the table. That's also the time for corridor work. We haven't talked much about that today, but that's a word that you've all familiar with, that process of getting to know each other, to develop friendships, to be available so that they can ask questions and we can meet them where they are. That also includes times we call for the brightening of the atmosphere, the use of games and music. And this also includes the time for chapel visits, which I had referenced in the morning schedule, that we still have the chapel visits that take place on Saturday. Chapel visits, according to the 2019 Rector's Guide, are encouraged to happen kind of organically, either as a table and individually, so that if an individual wanted to go and make a visit to the Blessed Sacrament, he or she could. But the table visits are still encouraged. And that is one thing that I will say with regards to how we have implemented it. We have scheduled that just for fear that it would not happen at all, because those visits to the Blessed Sacrament as a table are still a very important part of Curcio. So,
Jennifer, I think what we heard.
I'm sorry. Yep.
Sorry about that. I think what we heard
Nope.
what we heard last month was, without that structure from 2 to 3:30, we have inadvertently ended up with people thinking, well, I need to remain at my table. Because, and that's what everybody just kind of naturally did without understanding, kind of having the expectations and the communication up front that, all right, here's your time, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this, without a little bit of direction. I think that's something on us that we'll need to empower the team to be able to communicate that to folks so that they can take advantage of all of those opportunities.
Okay. Any questions about what's happening Saturday afternoon? Any of the changes? What looks different?
Jennifer, where did they move the leaders talk?
Good question. Good question, Dale. In the original Rector Guide, the 5th talk on Friday and Saturday, that would be piety and leaders, are given after dinner. And we had, I will qualify this, we meaning the diocesan leaders who were given the new Rector Guide to implement, were given the discretion to change times as it fit our needs. So one of our needs being that most of us are older, having the 5th talk after dinner really extended the evening and meant a later bedtime. So we modified. So, we would have, so for us, we have the Leaders Royal before dinner. Dinner is not at 5, dinner is later at 6. So we were able to, we didn't have to stick to the timeline that was in the original Curcio, because consider as well, fewer people on that original Curcio, different culture entirely than what we are used to. So thankfully, we were allowed to move the times around to fit our what they call our reality, to use the common sense to fit it into what works best for our needs. So, but I'm glad you asked that question.
They probably ate dinner at 9 o'clock in Mallorca.
New York, yeah. Well, yeah. Different culture.
Cut into the skit.
Yeah.
Cut into the skit.
They probably ate dinner in Mallorca at 9 o'clock and over there in Spain. They ate dinner late.
Yeah, and actually, I was pointing out to Michael, we had to change some of these slides because this 2019 Rector's Guide, when Michael had done the original slides, it was done from the PDF that we've been using. Since then, like in this short period of time, the Rector's Guide has actually been available in print, and they've already changed the times in that printed Rector Guide. So that's what this reflects. So you can see how even National is responding to some of the comments from people about, how, this is so late. What do we do? Do we have to do it this way? No. And I qualify that no by saying, and this is what we were told over and over again. And Tom, you were with me when we were at that national encounter, from Seth Agian, who is our national English coordinator. He goes, do what makes sense. Use your common sense. Don't change the content of the weekend. But if you need to change a time or a wake up time or a meal time to accommodate either your facility or the needs of the group, do it. Do it. So,
Yeah, they gave us the latitude to what
yes,
fits our particular organization.
right.
Well, I think it's good that there is the time period there. You've got like an hour and a half. There is more time for group discussion at the tables.
Mhm.
And if people need to get up and take a break and go to the restroom, they can and still come back. But I found in working my first step by step, you know, we had to kind of stop the discussion of some to go on to the next talk because they still wanted to, you know, a lot of them still wanted to talk. They didn't even want to sing songs. They wanted to keep, I think there was a lot more discussion going on and you weren't rushing it so much. So, I mean, that's, to me, that was great. I mean, I loved seeing them talking so much about the talk and about where they were in their, whatever the topic is about, you know, so a lot more time for discussion, especially that sacrament talk. So in the morning
Yes.
or in the afternoon we had a lot of discussion on the different sacraments.
Yeah. Great. You ready to move on? Just one more slide. Okay. Second day, Saturday evening. And you can see there is a lot more in here. That 2019 Rector's Guide does show the leaders Royo at 6:30, and there was still a lot of activity scheduled for that evening. So really, you can see what, and looking at these two between the 2007 and the 2019, there aren't as many differences, but I wanted to point out that prior to 2019, our weekends looked even different than what this 2007 Curcio manual shows. So we had already deviated from that. You know, our evening consisted of table summaries and poster work, which is still the same, the poster presentations and the skits. And then we went into a chapel visit that concluded with the examination of conscience and night prayers. That chapel visit was probably one of the biggest places where we hung ornaments. And those evenings would be really, really late. That's where we skimmed over the ornaments, but that's where you had, you know, 2 hours of adoration or lengthy healing services or Taizé services. Again, all beautiful, beautiful expressions of our faith and worship and communication and communion with God. But that wasn't the place to do it. Referencing, you know, that, you know, the development of one's prayer life and introducing those things is better to take place in their fourth day, supported by the fourth day community, not on a 3-day weekend. You know, we give them so much that it becomes, you really can't see that tree through the forest. Plus, it says here retire at 10:30. We all know that Saturday evenings would go well past that time. And it's a late night to bed, and Sunday is so important. We really rob them of sleep, which robbed them and all of us from that need to be attentive to the message that is given on the third day on Sunday, which is so important because that's what prepares them for the fourth day. So,
Jennifer, can you explain fiesta?
Yes, I was just going to go do that. So I wanted to kind of make the point that what we were doing is different than what's even listed there on the screen for the 2007 manual. So moving to that next column, obviously our leaders Royal is before dinner. But so it starts very simply with a visit to the Blessed Sacrament and the Holy Rosary. That is your chapel time on Saturday evening. And then there is the fiesta. So the fiesta is what they considered an improvised social. And I think that's kind of the word that we used in our script or our implementation of it, because culturally, we don't really experience fiesta very often, and it's not to ignore the heritage, if you will, of our roots of Cursillo, but it was people didn't know what to do. So fiesta is just that time to celebrate, to kind of let loose, to I'll call it elevated corridor work, where we're all together. And the improvised part of it is that we're not staging anything. We're just having an opportunity for everybody to be together. This is the place where we continued our skits, because we found that the skits that we had been doing, although we as team members love doing them, it really, the laughter that was shared as a group was just so beautiful, and I think broke down a lot of barriers that anyone had, really opened people up, and that's that whole piece of brightening the atmosphere. We've not talked much about that, but those are those moments that we can create on the weekend to kind of create ease for the new cursistas as they are kind of absorbing everything on the weekend, which not only allows them to again to facilitate those encounters, but also encourages that further development of friendship between team members and the new cursistas. So the fiesta, again, is just a term for just social, but that's what it is in the new Rector Guide. That's what they call it. And then they have it going into the reunion of the table groups and presentations. I think we reverse those two, that we do the reunion of the table groups and the posters first, and then go into the fiesta, or the social time. So does that make sense? Any
During
questions?
the days, and I wasn't in on last month's, but during Friday and Saturday, are they still having like spiritual direction time for individual new cursistas throughout the day?
Spiritual direction and reconciliation. Yes. So
Okay.
those little pieces are not in there. So that has not,
Right.
those things have not changed and are still very much part of
Okay.
the weekend. Yes. So that kind of wraps up Saturday. Again, the Rector Guide, the new Rector Guide that's illustrated there shows a late night, but it wasn't a late night. And for those who choose to stay up and talk and have conversations, that is up to them. But as a team and the activities of the day, we end earlier so that everybody can get a good night's sleep and be ready for the next day. So, any questions about Saturday evening or anything that we've talked about for Saturday?
Or just any high level questions about it.
Yeah, I mean, Saturday's a fun day. People are starting to get loose and get to know one another, and yeah, it's still very good. And I'll just emphasize again about those visits to the Blessed Sacrament are still such a powerful part of the weekend. There is an emphasis not so much on adoration where the Blessed Sacrament is exposed, but just that visit to the Blessed Sacrament, so that it becomes kind of a natural, so it becomes natural, I should say, for the new cursista. Again, the premise is that they are far away, that they aren't in that relationship with God. And I think that's important to remember, both as a team member and as a member of the fourth day community, a cursista, is that, when we're talking about writing Palanca, we really don't know where each person is on his or her journey. We may have sponsored the person and we know things about them, but we really don't know how God is working in their lives. And, there was a time when we would invite people who are already well established in their church. They were active, they were already leaders, and there was nothing wrong with that. But as we said, preferentially, the Cursillo is designed for those who are far away, and thus the simplistic approach. And I think that simplistic approach works for all of us. Again, as a Christian, someone who's, a pilgrim who is, walking with Christ, I always appreciate the simple approach, no matter where, no matter where I am on my journey. And I think we all know that of our friends, that, we meet people where they are. We share our love of God. We share what we know, but we never force it on them. So I think that's an important piece that ties to that foundational charism that Eduardo has emphasized, that being the freedom of the person, how important that is. And we let God do the work. We let Christ do the work. So we're just there to clear the space so that it can happen.